government, Trudeau's government, has actually put an expiry date onto the banking system. Okay, so we used to have it that every 5 or 10 years there would be a review, if you will, of our Bank Act. Okay, he's now put an expiry date of June 30th, 2025. So in June 30th, 2025, next year, the Bank Act in Canada expires. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that the large federally chartered banks lose their mandates. They're no longer legal entities. And not just that, other foreign banks operating in Canada also lose their entities. And you might scratch your head and you say, well, why did Mr. Trudeau choose June 30th, right? Why would he choose that date? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in the House of Commons, it usually wraps up, say, about June 15th, because they want to get back to Canada Day in their ridings on July 1st. The Senate hangs around for a few days, maybe a week later into July 20-something, just to make sure they clear the roster of the bills that can go to royal assent and get signed on by the Governor General. But by June 30th, everybody's out of town. There's no parliamentary oversight. There's no senator. There's no member of parliament around. So that means that for all of July, all of August, and quite possibly all of September of next year, there is no parliamentary oversight with regard to Trudeau and what he's doing with regard to the banks and central bank digital currency. That's scary stuff. 3 months without any correction whatsoever.
I'm so pleased to introduce our special guest speaker this evening. Rob Anders is a former Canadian politician who represented the riding of Calgary West from 1997 until 2015, and he was a founding member of the Conservative Party of Canada. Tonight, he joins us to discuss the impending threat of central bank digital currency, or CBDC, in Canada. The Canadian government and the Bank of Canada are taking significant steps towards issuing a digital form of the Canadian dollar. And if they do, they will have access to all of your private banking information, including information on every transaction connected to your daily life. Rob has comprehensively researched this topic and is convinced it will be disastrous for Canadians to allow the governments to issue CBDCs, especially with the understanding that it will be a financial surveillance tool. We're so thrilled that Rob can join us this evening to share his extensive knowledge with us. Will you all please help me welcome Rob Anders. Rob, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Empower Hour.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. Well, Rob, I'm so excited to have you on. This has been a topic I've been wanting to talk about again. I think it might have been once or twice last year. We've been dealing, I call them, with the banksters and bringing awareness and helping people to think about their investments that they currently have in the bank, the threat of losing those investments, and taking steps, what reasonable steps they can take. But this looming threat of digital ID banking is, a growing concern. And so I understand you have a presentation. You're going to educate people. And so I just want to hand it over to you. But is there anything you'd like to mention to people before going into the presentation?
Well, maybe how I got into this. What happened was, I was putting out thousands of emails with regard to adverse reactions and jabs and mandates and arresting pastors and various things. And one of the things that scared me was during the Alberta leadership race to replace Jason Kenney, there were contestants who said that they thought that central bank digital currency was inevitable. And I thought, that's not good. And that bothered me at a gut level. And so I decided, because other people were already talking about jabs and mandates and pastors and lockdowns, I thought, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole of this. And so I read about 10 books and I watched lots of YouTubes. And I think, I've got to the stage now where some of the bankers that I respect are interacting with me on a regular basis to appreciate what I'm doing, because they realize the dangers of this. Unfortunately, a lot of the branch managers, that's not their business. But for the people who actually try to follow the politics, the government relations, and for some of the very savvy people who have anticipated what the results are, they are anticipating and understand where this is going.
Right.
So,
And yeah, I was going to say, just like I say, I'm really grateful that you've taken this on. I know that Bow Valley Credit Union was one of the banks that refused to go along with Justin Trudeau's freeze on citizens' bank accounts. And so there are good individuals out there who understand what the threat is. But I think a great deal of it is education. And not only educating the masses, the Canadian citizens, trying to help embolden them to take control of the situation and to remember who they're voting. It really does come down to who they vote for in the next election as well. It's the upper echelon that are supporting this and upholding the Bank of Canada and the decisions that are being made by globalists. I mean, this is a really big deal as to how it's coming from an unelected global government implementing these demands and mandates that are against our Constitution, Charter rights, and our freedoms, trickling down to the local branch and the bank manager, who are then going to go ahead and with lockstep and follow it. And so I'm going to be interested to see your presentation. And then I want to encourage our viewers that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. If you're watching live, I would recommend that you sign on to the Empower Hour so that you can put your questions in, because this is an important topic and I'm hoping to get as many of those questions answered after your presentation. So over to you, Rob. Thank you so much.
Central bank digital currency is just a new version of a very old and terrible idea, communism. And I'll go through why that is, because a lot of people wouldn't automatically link them, but nonetheless, this stuff has been tried before. Now they just have more technology to do it with, which is very scary. So let me tell you why. Let's go through some history. So first off, we talk about early money. Some people call it biblical, scriptural money, because of course the Bible mentions gold and silver. But we have the Lion of Lydia, the Ying Yuan of China, the Darius of Persia. We have the silver turtle of Greece, the Karshapana of India. We have Ionia having a silver currency, the drachma, the denarius of Rome. And then, of course, there were some examples of copper, the spade in China, the assis in Rome. And this stuff is the stuff that makes sense, frankly, and we can go through that later on in terms of where I think this will all wind up eventually. But that's the stuff that we really know. Now, I want to also talk about something as Canadians we should be very proud about, which is that we had the longest running example of free banking in the world from 1817 until 1914. So what that meant was that we had around 20 banks who, as long as you had enough gold and silver, okay, you could go ahead and issue your own currency. And we didn't have a central bank at that time. And so this worked very well. And our currency was respected not only in Canada, but also in the Caribbean and in Great Britain, because we had a bit of a triangle trade relationship where there'd be rum coming from the Caribbean, cod from Atlantic Canada, furs, etc., going to England for finished products coming back, etc. So this system worked quite well. But then what happens is along comes the First World War, and they decide to go off this system because they're going to print money. The other thing, the reason why central banks really came in to vogue in North America was that just previous to the First World War, there was a banking crunch or crisis in the United States. And the guy who came in to save it was J.P. Morgan. And because J.P. Morgan did that, there were some who said, well, why should the American banking system be dependent upon one man? And so they thought, well, we should have some sort of government bank that does what J.P. Morgan did to save the credit crunch. And so they created the Federal Reserve in the United States. And of course, we created the Bank of Canada in Canada. But I think you're going to see why this has some problems, and we may regret that. Now, I'm going to go into the next slide. I show this just because I want people to understand how many banks we had and how many of them were issuing their own form of currency based on their silver and gold bullion reserves. I want to point out that my office that I had in East Block of the House of Commons is where Canada's gold bullion used to reside after the Bank of Canada was created. And so we had a gold bullion reserve. There were 3 big vaults, maybe 4, 5, depending on if you count the one that was further down the hall and the one upstairs, of where the gold bullion reserve was. Okay. Now there's nothing there. The doors are still there. They're beautiful. They're brass. They have scrolls in them, etc. But that's all been converted into a cafeteria. There's no gold there. Canada has no gold bullion reserves or silver bullion reserves. We're one of 12 countries in the world that doesn't. We are below Fiji in terms of them having 20 kilograms of gold. It's kind of ridiculous. Anyhow, so let's talk about the Marxist communist roots of some of these ideas. So in 1845, Karl Marx, along with Frederick Engels, publishes a book called The Holy Family. And basically, it's advocating for the abolition of money. What Marx's idea is that capitalists have money, and that allows them to hoard power and wealth. And if you can get rid of money, then you get rid of capitalist power. But then it begs the question of, well, what are you going to use for a currency and medium of exchange? And in Marx's philosophy, if you want to call it that, ideology, he thought units of labor, okay? And that was all just theory. However, time goes by, and along comes this, Vladimir Lenin guy in the Russian Revolution in 1917, and they actually tried to implement these ideas, and this is what it looks like. So in June of 1914, Russia ends the redeeming of currency because they want to print money, just like all the other countries want to print money to finance the war. By 1917, they had November 20th, they had 12 banks that were holding 80% of the capital. Okay, that got nationalized because the October Revolution happened the month before. Now, I just want people to absorb that number. They had 12 banks holding 80% of the capital that were nationalized. Canada has less chartered banks than 12. We've only got a few major chartered banks. So actually, it would be easier to implement these ideas in Canada than it was in Russia in November of 1917. Let that sink in. So basically what happens is the reserves and the income are all redirected to the government. Withdrawals of deposits are restricted. We saw that certainly in the case with the truckers here in Canada. That was just a sampling of what is to come. They created Gosbank, which did not lend money, but merely kept records of transactions. And so in 1918, into the next year, they had 405 enterprises employing 205,000 people that closed due to lack of credit. Because once you go to the system, it collapses, you see. You don't have private banks that are doing the lending and figuring out if you're capable of paying a loan and what have you. You have the government kind of taking on these types of things and meddling in these transactions. What they also do is they raise taxes. So £1 1 British pound sterling was the equivalent of 45 rubles at that point. But then inflation takes off, and we know that inflation's been an issue for us as well in the printing of currency, Mr. Trudeau, up to $1 trillion. But anyhow, inflation rate becomes 598%. Next year in 1919, it's 1,376%. And then, August of 1920, 37,000 firms are nationalized. 5,000 of them employed only one person. Imagine that. The economy declines by 85%. Wage and price controls with government monopoly on grain handling. Where have we seen that before? The Canada Wheat Board, right? Doesn't that ring a bell? In 1921, Lenin introduces the NEP, the new economic policy. Haven't we heard of the NEP before? That was Trudeau's senior, Pierre, right? So Herbert Hoover's American Relief Administration, just to point out, Herbert Hoover, who became president of the United States, he sold the largest copper mine in the world to some Russian aristocrats in 1916. Good timing. And then after that, because he was a good coordinator organizer, he was put in charge of the Belgian food relief program that was looking after the Belgian kids who were starving to death, but not only the kids, also the adults, and during the First World War. And when the Russian Revolution broke out and there was starvation there, they sent him to not only look after the Belgian situation because the war had ended, but they sent him to look up into the situation in Russia. And he had 237 ships, 21,000 kitchens, 768 million tons of flour, grain, rice, beans, pork, milk, and sugar. And they employed 125,000 Russians to unload, haul, weigh, cook, and serve the food. Despite all of that, £1 sterling by 1923 was worth over 5 billion rubles. That's how badly the Russian currency had crashed. Okay. And you'll see it's not just a matter of the currency crashing, but it gets worse. So once again, Mr. Lenin, the way to crush the bourgeoisie is to grind them between the millstones of taxation and inflation. Well, if that sounds like a Trudeauism to me, I mean, that guy loves taxation, and he's certainly, by creating $1 trillion worth of debt, inviting inflation, printing money. All right, so something else that Lenin said, just to explain what he was thinking. Hundreds of thousands of ruble notes are being issued daily by our treasury. This is done not in order to fill the coffers of the state with practically worthless paper, but with the deliberate intention of destroying the value of money as a means of payment. There is no justification for the existence of money in the Bolshevik state, where the necessities of life will be paid for by work alone. Experience has taught us it is impossible to root out the evils of capitalism merely by confiscation and expropriation. For however ruthlessly such measures may be applied, astute speculators and obstinate survivors of capitalist classes will always manage to evade them and continue to corrupt the life of the community. The simplest way to exterminate the very spirit of capitalism is therefore to flood the country with notes of high face value without financial guarantees of any sort. Already even a 100 ruble note is almost valueless, in Russia. Soon even the simplest peasant will realize it is only a scrap of paper, not worth more than the rags from which it is manufactured. Men will cease to covet and hoard it so soon as they discover it will not buy anything, and the great illusion of the value and the power of money on which the capitalist state is based will have been definitely destroyed. That is the real reason why our presses are printing ruble bills day and night without rest. Okay, so when you create $1 trillion, okay, what you're doing is you're devaluing the currency, and we certainly understand that all too well here. Okay, so go on to the next one here. It really comes down to, do you trust this guy, right? And I think you have liberals inside the caucus of the Liberal Party who are calling for his leadership, asking for him to resign. He asked for unlimited spending at the beginning of COVID, right? I don't think that was a coincidence. Thank God we had Member of Parliament Scott Reid, who said he was not going to allow unanimous consent to allow Trudeau unlimited spending during the COVID situation. And he's raised our debt ceiling. I remember when I first started as a Member of Parliament back in the 1990s, I wondered, at the time the debt was around $600 billion. I thought, I wonder if in my lifetime it will cross the $1 trillion mark. Trudeau added $1 trillion just by himself, right? That's how dangerous that is. But what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, in the Soviet Union in 1921, the official estimates said that 5 million people starved to death. The unofficial estimates are that 10 million starved to death out of a population of 130 million. 1 out of 13 people across the country. This boy that you see here pictured in Zaporizhia was found guilty of killing his 3-year-old brother and eating him. Okay, you look at how starved that child is. Okay, I didn't mention in here that in that same area, which right now has the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, that the dams have been blown over and may not have enough water to make sure that it's cooled. Okay, it may result in a disaster larger than Chernobyl. All right, that area also at that time had 12 butcher shops that were selling human meat. Okay, just to give you an idea of how bad that was. And I want people to understand, the ramifications of some of this craziness. So what does that look like for an individual? Well, for the ones who didn't starve to death, that means the caloric intake fell by 30%. So here you have 3, poutines. Okay, that means their caloric intake went down to 2. And I'm not talking pop. I'm not talking orange juice. I'm not talking anything else in addition to that. That was it, right? That's how few calories the ones who survived were living on a daily basis. Now, what that meant was that by 1921 and 1923, the Soviet experiment, the socialist experiment on the face of the earth was about to be extinguished. It was about to be wiped out. And so even the hardcore communists realized that in order to save their situation, nobody trusted them to print real currency, anything useful. So they actually had to turn to the British banks, and the British minted them these silver coins. I actually have one of these kopecks in my collection. And then you have the gold kopeck, which was printed in 1923. They were so desperate to save the situation that they actually reverted to minting gold and silver coins. And that's why gold and silver, folks, it's hard to get past those, because that's, like I said, real money, and it exists. It goes back over thousands of years. So, once again, you look at these pictures here. Do you trust this guy to trace all of your transactions? If you buy ivermectin, what will your environmental social governance number or social credit score be? Will they say, oh, we think you're buying too much gasoline, your car's too much of a gas guzzler, you're driving too far, you're eating too much red meat, you're producing too much plastic or garbage, etc. And that's literally, when you look at the Chinese situation, I want people to understand this. China has this central bank digital currency, and is being used to control and manipulate their population. Okay, we'll go into that. So, for example, you have Bitcoin, and I want to make a clear distinction between Bitcoin and central bank digital currency. Bitcoin, you can invest in that, just like you can invest in gold or silver or seashells or whatever you want to put your money into. Okay, but some of these central bank digital currency folks, they don't like that stuff because it's not government controlled, you see? So the central bank digital currency is like a government version of Bitcoin. Now, China particularly doesn't like a free trading currency system, because anytime they open up the Chinese yuan to the free market, what happens is money floods out of China. Now, Tanya, I know that you live in Vancouver, in that general area. The reason why real estate prices are so high is because people in China who don't trust their government are flooding money out either through Hong Kong or Taiwan or through mainland China to buy real estate, because they would rather have a property in Vancouver that's sprouting weeds, that they're not living in, than to have the money in a bank account in China. Because in China, they can be arrested, they can be tortured, they can have their organs sold. And they can have the government go ahead and arbitrarily take money out of their accounts, etc., have money expire on them, all these types of things. So the reason the Chinese love this so much is because now their central bank, talking to a Canadian central bank, talking to an American central bank, etc., can just all peg their currencies. Like right now, for example, if I go to Cuba, I could go ahead and, despite whatever the official exchange rate is, I can go to a cab driver, it might be illegal in Cuba, and I can exchange American or Canadian dollars on the free market. But if cash doesn't exist, you can't do that. There is no free market. And so the Chinese love this idea of freezing the amount of their yuan to all the other currencies by the central banks, because there is no private thing then. They don't have to worry about money flooding out of the system. There is no cash. There are no taxi drivers who go ahead and conduct these things as separate transactions. And so in China, the government pays you in central bank digital currency. They can restrict your ability to buy plane tickets, train tickets, bus tickets. They can fine you. They can put expiration dates on the money. Okay, this is what central bank digital currency is and looks like, and it's a terrible idea. So let's talk about some other places that are trying this out. So you have, for example, El Salvador that's using Bitcoin. So that's slightly better than central bank digital currency because it's not entirely controlled by the government. But they do have an issue where there's a bit of a roller coaster, and it's not as stable as what you would like to think. So despite the fact that this guy maybe has some good intentions at heart, it's not a particularly stable situation. I also want to, mention here that people don't know this. I mean, I hope you can read it's hard to read because of the yellow and everything else, but our government, Trudeau's government, has actually put an expiry date onto the banking system. Okay, so we used to have it that every 5 or 10 years there would be a review, if you will, of our Bank Act. Okay, he's now put an expiry date of June 30th, 2025. So in June 30th, 2025, next year, the Bank Act in Canada expires. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that the large federally chartered banks lose their mandates. They're no longer legal entities. And not just that, other foreign banks operating in Canada also lose their entities. And you might scratch your head and you say, well, why did Mr. Trudeau choose June 30th, right? Why would he choose that date? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in the House of Commons, it usually wraps up, say, about June 15th, because they want to get back to Canada Day in their ridings on July 1st. The Senate hangs around for a few days, maybe a week later into July 20-something, just to make sure they clear the roster of the bills that can go to royal assent and get signed on by the Governor General. But by June 30th, everybody's out of town. There's no parliamentary oversight. There's no senator. There's no member of parliament around. So that means that for all of July, all of August, and quite possibly all of September of next year, there is no parliamentary oversight with regard to Trudeau and what he's doing with regard to the banks and central bank digital currency. That's scary stuff. 3 months without any correction whatsoever. Okay, let's look at a few other things here. I want to talk about some of the solutions. Okay, Alberta went down this route in the 1930s during the Depression. It was William Aberhart created these prosperity certificates, and Alf Hook, who was a minister of his and the longest-serving social credit member in the Alberta legislature in Rocky Mountain House, created the Alberta Treasury Branch in 1938. So Alberta's had a little bit of experience in this, but I want to point out that BC, and I know you've got an NDP government now, but you might hopefully have a Conservative government in October. Okay. With Mr. Rustad, etc. What you can do is you can circumvent some of this stuff by the federal government, because we have provincially regulated financial institutions. And if you say, for example, if the premier of the province dictates and says that they have to have, let's say, 3% of their assets in gold, silver, maybe copper, maybe oil, you now have a bulwark against Trudeau trying to collapse the federal currency. So there's other institutions, other ways of safeguarding money, etc. Okay, and I just point these out because Calgary and Alberta have been down this path on some of these situations in the past. We print up, say, for example, mint coins for the Calgary Stampede. So I want people to understand that we've kind of traveled down some of these avenues in the past and should again. And I want to note that in the United States, this beauty of a federal system, this is where you have a Ron DeSantis or other governors who are saying, yeah, we recognize gold and silver as a medium of exchange. And they're setting this up to make sure that if Biden tries to force through the Fed Now stuff with the Federal Reserve, that he's not able to totally shut down cash in the United States. So with regard to the provincially incorporated financial institutions, their mandate says that they have to operate in a safe and sound manner. And I want to talk a little bit about, kind of the history. So in 1844, you have in England, Sir Robert Peel's Bank Act. 1913, like I said, after the crisis with J.P. Morgan saving the credit system to supply some liquidity, some money to the banks to make sure some of them didn't fail and didn't create a whole run on the system overall. They went ahead and created the Federal Reserve Act. In 1944, toward the end of the Second World War, the United States basically said, we're going to take on a fairly hefty responsibility here, and we're going to have in a sense, a basis of an international currency with regard to heavy transactions, oil, et cetera, blah, 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 blah. But what happens is in 1971, Richard Nixon, who I would argue is probably the president who was the most subverted by the Soviets, et cetera, in the history of the United States, other than maybe Donald Trump. He might take the cake on this one now. But what happened was he was worried that Charles de Gaulle in France was going to repatriate the French gold reserves back from the United States to France. And so as a result, he pulled the U.S. off of the gold standard in August 1971. And I would argue that ever since that time, we've really been walking on eggshells. We've been living in a fiat currency situation where there was always a reckoning. Originally, the way it worked in the very beginning with regard to gold and silver reserves was that whatever currency you issued, you had to have 100% of the gold and silver. Then it got whittled down to 25. Eventually, when the United States pulled off the gold reserve in 1971, it was down to 3%. Therefore, Brett Oland and I with Bow Valley Credit Union, who you've mentioned, we both agree that if you were to reinstitute this at 3%, it's something that I think a lot of the provincially or state regulated financial institutions would be able to manage, and would create a ripple effect in the marketplace whereby, say, for example, people who have credit cards or mortgages or deposits would say, I feel better with that provincially regulated financial institution because there's something behind it, right? Because let's face it, during a crisis, okay, there will be banks that fail. And the banks that are going to fail are the ones who don't have anything to back things up, don't have real tangible assets to back things up. They're overextended with regard to their loans, et cetera, et cetera. So there probably will be some bank problems. And setting this type of system up like I'm talking about is a way that, you can encourage people to set their money up with more responsible financial institutions. I would hope that not only if Alberta did this, but I would love to see BC do this with a change in government. I'd love to see Saskatchewan do it. I'd love to see Ontario do it. And that may be enough of a critical mass that no matter what Trudeau tries to do, even if we can't get rid of him before October of 2025, this will hopefully preserve the system. It's the best that I've been able to come up with regard to how to try to save the situation. But that kind of runs through a good. I know there were a couple slides that I obviously in my jiggering of the slides I missed, and as I track back through a few here, I might be able to find them. But there were some other places that stumbled around with trying. Zimbabwe, for example, Zimbabwe suffered tremendous inflation, and they were a template, a test, petri dish, if you will, for the central bank digital currency, and now they're looking to implement the Chinese digital yuan. No surprises there. So there are a couple other countries. Nigeria is another one, also the Chinese digital yuan. No surprises there. No coincidence. Like I said, the Chinese really love this because in China, literally through facial recognition, they can track all their citizens and they can automatically deduct from your account if they find you or find there's something objectionable that you're up to. You make some posts, for example, against the government, that type of thing. Anyhow, that basically runs through my slideshow presentation. And now maybe, you have some questions.
So wonderful, Rob. I'm just sitting here. I was taking copious amounts of notes. I think that you've provided a lot of great research, history, and information so people understand that the importance of backing our fiat currency, that paper money, by gold and silver, and as you had mentioned, oil. And, people in previous shows that we've done, first I want to make sure that people know we're not giving them financial advice. We're just providing you information so that you have, you're better informed to make the right decisions. And so there's a lot of people about a year and a half ago as well, when people were very unsure of the banks, that started to pull their money out, especially in the lockdown 2 years ago when they were freezing people's bank accounts. And the actual Canadian banks were angry at Trudeau for doing that. And I always say it's not angry. I don't think that they were necessarily angry that the digital banking is coming. They just weren't ready to flip the switch. And so instead, people were pulling their cash out and making sure that they had something tangible. If you can't touch it, it has no value. And because Trudeau has put us into this great deficit, $1 trillion plus, I mean, this is just sickening and shocking. We can understand now how that devalues our money and makes it useless. So go ahead. What were you going to just say as well, where you can respond?
So
Yeah.
literally billions of dollars. They froze about, I understand, around 200 plus bank accounts. But what happened was, in reaction to that, billions of dollars were flooding out of the system. And I know bankers very well, and they were telling me that literally branch managers were running around the country asking the staff in the various branches how much cash they had on hand, because they were worried they were going to be in a situation where they weren't going to be able to provide enough cash to customers coming in through the door. And it was literally creating a run on currency, and that collapses banks because it's all based on ratios. Like when you go ahead and you have the government step into the system, like let's take, for example, Toronto Dominion. Okay. I have a mortgage through them. Now, if you have Toronto Dominion, it has to make a determination about whether or not somebody or a business is a viable investment and whether or not they have the capacity to pay, et cetera. They study that in terms of the ratios, et cetera. Well, once the government takes over currency, I mean, you think how badly run the government is. You think of the trillions of dollars of debt that are run up by the federal government. Do you think the federal government's going to do as good a job at monitoring money and loans and et cetera, as the banks do? Of course not. It's not their business, right? They're terrible at it. Yep. They just look to buy votes. And so as a result, when you give that type of power over to the government, you're asking for serious trouble. In Alberta, we have the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. I sat on an advisory body back when I was a university student with regard to that, and we did, traveled around and listened to submissions and what have you. That thing's been so badly managed. When you have politicians as bankers, what was happening is Alberta was giving out very, very cheap loans. Like at that time when it was created with Peter Lougheed, you could get 18, 19, 20, 21% interest on this money. Alberta was loaning the money out at single digits to be able to buy the support of other provinces who were looking for cheap money to sustain their debts in order to get them on side with regard to some of our mineral rights, property rights, et cetera, notwithstanding clause considerations on constitutional stuff in 1982. So we really gouged Albertans in terms of the value of their money. We overtaxed them, and then we gouged them in terms of the returns on investment with regard to the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund. You just don't trust politicians as bankers. They're not bankers. They're not qualified to be bankers.
Politicians are unions. As you're talking, I'm just thinking about my Uncle Ed, who recently passed away, but he worked for Canada Safeway in the milk plant for many, many years. That's where he retired from. And he came from the Netherlands absolutely with not a penny in their pocket. When they came here, they worked so hard out of poverty to own a home and provide for his family. And he always was very careful with his pennies. And here the union, Safeway, they ended up selling to Sobeys, and they left a lot of their employees in the dust. And the unions take over. They started investing the finances, and next thing you know, he's losing 25 to 50% of his pension. And I tried to get lawyers. I tried to assist this group of gentlemen who were trying to deal with this matter, and there was just no one doing it, because it was literally, in my books, it was a wealth transfer of what I was seeing going on there. They're actually stealing funds from people, and we have said that over COVID. This is the greatest wealth transfer, I say it's the greatest crime in the history of the world financially, and it is truly a wealth transfer. And once the government takes control of our finances completely, they can up the taxes to as much as they want. I know that some of the people during the lockdowns got fines, and the government here in British Columbia right now, or the federal government, is actually just taking the money straight out of any tax return. They're just going in. It's just, there's no appeal in the court. There's no justice. And so when I say there's major concerns about the CBDCs and sort of the middleman, the bank is now out of the way and the government's handling all our money. This is just not a good scene. And
I remember years ago when I was first running for office back in the 1990s, I went and spoke to the Danish Canadian and the Scandinavian Canadian businessmen's clubs, and they told me about their relatives who had invested in these RRSPs, RESPs that they had to set up in Scandinavia. And eventually the governments just looked at those things as piggy banks that they would go and raid, and they would tax you on the money going in and the money coming out and the money you had as a nest egg and everything else. And it just became a thing that they just regularly thieved on whatever basis they wanted. So I divested myself of that. When you have the government being able to track everything, the CRA can come along and say, we think there's a discrepancy between what you're declaring and what you're spending. So we're going to assess you an extra $10,000, and it's going to be gone. You can appeal it. Too bad, so sad. It's kind of like the Doomsday Book when that was set up, way back when in England, because the government was trying to find everything there was available to tax. And with this digital currency and then wanting to digitize all the assets, that's kind of what this is. And if people, the people who scare me the most on digital currency, central bank digital currency, is when I'm knocking somebody's house and it's a $5 million home. I've got a petition that I do against this, and they listen to everything I've got to say, and they say, I'm not worried. I don't think it's going to affect me. And I think, wow, you have no idea.
Oh my goodness, yeah, you can kiss that $5 million home goodbye too pretty soon, right? With the way they, I won't go into that, but with the natives and the land grab and the UNDRIP, that's just an avenue of the Agenda 2030, 2050 to take away the property rights as well. And so I do a weekly news update after this, and a couple of links that I have up is that the government is also, they always have their marketing pitch. And, this is going to just be so good for all Canadians because it's going to make sure that your investments are secure. And of course, we know anything online, anything in the digital abyss is going to be hackable. And people pride themselves on getting in there and hacking at fraudsters and the rest of it. So just a big message, my friends, don't believe anything the government's telling you. It literally, if you can't touch it, if you don't have free access to it, it's not a good situation. And so, Rob, there's a lineup of questions here. I'm just going to go through some of them. When you touched on the RRSPs, and I know somebody had emailed us before you came on and said, what do you think will happen to RRSPs? I look back on any RRSP investments as, I watch my mom and trying to take any money out, being taxed, like you say, to the maximum on it, having no free access at this end of her life to her finances. I would discourage anybody anymore from even investing in RRSPs. What do you have to say about this? And where will those go if they do succeed in putting the CBDC in place?
Right. Well, I mean, it's hard to argue against RRSPs being a tax deferral strategy, right? Like, I get that. But man, oh man, when you have the government track and know everything that you've got, watch out. Because, like I say, in Scandinavia, it allowed them to just raid that piggy bank, whether it was going in, coming out, what was there is just the net sitting there, etc. It just became something for the government to just go and fleece whenever they wanted. So I got rid of mine years ago when I first got elected, type of thing. I went ahead and invested in real estate. Now, that being said, I've had the CRA, come after me viciously for the last 9 years. And, I had $300,000 taken out of one of the properties that I sold because, they said they were owed the money. Turns out the entire thing was thrown out of court. And now I'm having to take them to tax court to try to get some of that money back. But they're intentionally delaying it, saying, oh, you didn't submit Form 81. Oh, we didn't like the way you filled out Form 81. Oh, whatever. And they're just kicking the ball down the court so that they don't have to pay back, right? So I'm very trepidatious about all this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that through the years, as we've been trying to help people and inform them, it really has boiled down to a lot of buy silver, buy gold. Gold is just so expensive. People say, well, is silver, something that is worthwhile? I can say that I've invested in silver and about a year ago, and it's guaranteed to always go up. And a previous guest we had on is that if you looked several hundred years ago and you looked at a silver coin or a gold coin and the value then, and it would talk about the kind of carriage you had compared to the kind of car that you would have in current times, and it was equivalent. It holds
Absolutely.
its value. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. So I had a house, that was the one the CRA took $300,000 out of. Okay. I had a house in Saanich, just north of Victoria, on Vancouver Island. And I figured it out. That house was built in 1929, right before the stock market collapsed. That was back when we had real money. It was exchangeable for gold, etc. So I figured out that at that time, that house, the mortgage on it was about 3 gold coins. It was about $60 a month. Okay, because back at that point, a gold coin an ounce was worth about $20. Okay, now fast forward, almost 100 years. That's exactly what the financing was, right? Now never mind the house. You could go ahead and look at something like, say, for example, the gentleman buying a three-piece suit, a tie, a shirt, a set of shoes, etc. Okay, at that time you could do it for about $20 for about 1 ounce of gold. Today, an ounce of gold, it's around 2,000, 2,800, depending on where it's sitting at. For that same amount of money, you could buy the whole suit. Try to buy the whole suit and the tie and the shirt and the shoes for $20 today. That tells you where currency.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect example of it. And I think that it's even exceeded that because that's a very expensive suit. But I guess some people roll that way. Okay, so I've got a list of questions here I'll try to get through. So gold is very expensive now. What is your expectation of how much higher it will go? I would imagine it's going to keep climbing as it always has.
Yeah, let me talk about what I think is going to happen. There's a few interesting scenarios. First off, I think the euro will fail. I think that is just a matter of time. So Margaret Thatcher accurately predicted back in the 1980s, she said the European common market made sense because it meant that the British could sell their cod more cheaply, the Czechs could sell their crystal more cheaply, the Germans, could sell, their technology more cheaply, etc. And it gave the purchasing power to the customers as opposed to the taxation, to the governments. So she said that made sense. But she thought that the immigration controls, or lack thereof, were going to be a problem. And she also thought that the idea of having this broad-based currency across the entire European Union didn't make sense. Let's go into that. Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, basket cases. Okay. Britain has already exited with Brexit, Nigel Farage, etc. Now you've got the Alternative for Deutschland, which has been elected fairly substantially in the German Bundestag. The bankers in Frankfurt are looking to leave. When the bankers in Frankfurt leave, nobody's holding the bag, right? Now, when you think about the currency in the euro, when you evaluate a currency, you take a macroeconomic formula. Let's say it's got 23 variables. It's got what your imports are, what your exports are, what your savings rates are, your monetary policy, your taxation, your inflation. It takes into account all these variables. Well, that's about 23 variables for a single country, just Canada. If you have 20-some countries in the Eurozone, now you've got 20-some variables times 20-some variables. You're talking 400 to 500 variables to figure what the value of the euro is. It's ridiculous. Okay. And so I think that's going to crash. It's just a matter of time. If I knew exactly when it was going to crash, I'd buy 90-day puts to play the downside of the market. Okay. So I think that's going to go badly. The other thing is you have this BRICS situation, right? Brazil, Russia, India, maybe India's on the outs, but anyhow, China, South Africa, who are looking to challenge the US dollar. Mm-hmm. Now, let's just talk about that for a second. The US has something like 8,000 tons of gold. Okay. They're the biggest holder of gold in the world. Despite the fact they went off the gold standard in 71, they stopped selling off their gold reserves at some point because they realized they were the adult in the room and they couldn't kind of keep that up if they wanted to be a superpower. So they still have over 8,000 tons of gold. The Germans have, 2,000 tons of gold, of which 1,500 is based in New York, so that way they can play Forex currency exchanges, et cetera. So the next two big players, are Russia and China. Okay. Now, China used to have 3,000 tons of gold. It's now got less. Russia used to claim it had 2,000 tons of gold. It's less. Okay. And with Russia spending all the money that they are in the war in Ukraine, right? If I'm China, I'm taking every bit of Russian gold that I can get, right? I'm saying, if you want to buy weapons off me, drones, whatever it is, I'm going to bank that Russian gold, type of thing. But does China allow anybody to go in and do acid tests on its gold to figure out if it's real? No. Do you think Russia, Vladimir Putin's going to let you come in and check his gold reserves? No. So you can't trust them. The only stuff I trust about actual numbers out of China is how much copper they're buying from us or how much, various metals they're buying. That's real. But anything they're producing in terms of what they tell you, what they're producing in terms of grain or how much gold they have, you can't trust that stuff. It's all lies. I mean, according to China, they didn't even produce the Wuhan thing, right? I mean, whatever. You can't trust these guys. Oh, 1.4 billion? Oh, sorry, it's more like a billion. I don't know, Okay, so you can't trust them. And so I don't think that's going to work. Okay, I think that'll fail because if I'm a banker in Zurich or wherever it is, I'm not going to look at BRICS and go, oh yeah, it's a safer bet than the U.S. No way, no way. So I think that's bound to fail too. So therefore, the real $64,000 question is, will the United States have to repeg to gold? If you
and
have
what do you
all
mean
these
by that? What do you mean by repeg to gold?
Repeg to gold. So right now the United States isn't pegged to
okay.
gold. Yeah, repeg. So right now the United States is not pegged to gold. It hasn't been pegged to gold since 1971. Okay, since Nixon took it off. But if you have a collapse of the euro, and that's going to cause huge problems in credit in the banking system, and if you have a failure with regard to Russia, China, people talk about Chinese economic issues. Russia's obviously teetering with regard to their gas and the war in Ukraine and everything else. So if that stuff all falters, right, it could cause a severe ripple effect in the marketplace where the United States is forced to repeg to gold. And if that's the case, I think gold goes from, between $2,000 and $3,000 an ounce, and it doubles. It might even go higher.
Right.
They have to. I mean, they have 8,000 tons of it, but still, it's a huge issue. And so I think that I think silver has the potential to increase even more so than gold does. It usually does when there's a financial crisis. France went through this. They produced fiat currency after the return of the monarchy, after Napoleon was defeated in Waterloo. And so they had a system whereby they were just issuing paper, but eventually there's always a reckoning. You can't just issue paper without something backing it up. There's always a reckoning, and that happened to France. And then when those bankers left, they went to become bankers in Italy and the Vatican.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting what the year ahead, reveals about the financial system, not only in Canada, but around the world. As you're saying, all of these players, as far as Russia is concerned, I wasn't familiar with that. I know somebody here had asked, one of the questions was, can Rob discuss BRICS and the threat they may be to the financial system here? And obviously, I mean, I know I saw that video of the gold reserves that all of the countries had, and it was like sky rises, and as the gold was building, it would go to sky rise, and all of a sudden you see this gold blocks going all the way to the top, and who's at the top? But it was the USA. I mean, they have a huge reserve of gold, and how will it ultimately affect Canada and anybody that's investing in this?
Well, okay, so the United States has the largest gold bullion reserves in the world. However, they have huge debt. So if you take the U.S. federal debt, I think it's 22 trillion plus, and then you take all the other debts that are involved in terms of state debts and everything else. I mean, just governmental debt. I think you're talking over $30 trillion. So that gold is not enough to cover that. So, even though they're the best, in the world in terms of their gold bullion reserves, they've got a tremendous amount of debt. So,
okay.
I guess I would say, if the U.S. has to repeg, okay, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, for example, brought in the New Deal, one of the things they did was they made private gold ownership illegal. Now, nobody in the United States went to jail over it, but they certainly arm twisted and pressured people to give up their reserves. Now, I want to talk about the difference between, for example, a gold coin or a silver coin and bullion, okay, like an ingot, okay? Because let's take Canada. Let's say you have a gold or a silver coin. There's a nominal value on that coin. It might be $50, okay, that the government prints on the coin. Now, if the government, once again, do you trust Justin Trudeau? If he says we're going to repatriate that and you can't melt that gold because that's illegal because it's minted currency, and the Bank of Canada buys it back off you at $50 when the real market value is like $2,800, that's another form of theft, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're actually better off to own ingots, because that way it doesn't have a nominal value on it when it's issued as currency by a central bank, by a government, and that's a problem, because the governments, depending on how they write the laws, could say that it has to be repatriated at its nominal value.
Wow. Okay. This is really good information. I appreciate that. What I want to do is, there's a lot of questions. We were trying to do the show within an hour. So I'm going to do what we call a rapid fire. I'm going to ask you a question. You just go for it, and we'll see how many of these that we can get through. All right. Well, we've already talked about, is it safe to buy gold, not in certificates, but actually keeping it in a well-fortified safe or safety box? I'm even concerned about when people buy mass gold and they hire a company to store it. What's the chances of the government coming in even in that situation? So what do you have to say is the best way to do this?
I am so distrustful of the government with regard to this. So let's say, for example, you buy some gold and you say, I'm going to store it down at my bank in the safety deposit box. Well, you look at Argentina and those countries when they had real, financial issues, you weren't allowed to take out paper money, never mind your gold. Mm-hmm. Like, you think during a bank meltdown they're going to let you take the gold out of the bank? No, they're like, I'm sorry, we're closed for business today. We're closed for the next week. Okay, so I think if you're going to own it, have it, like possess it, because
find a way.
Yeah, because if this stuff hits the fan, and I think it very well could, I think we're shaping up for that. Then you want to actually physically own it.
Yeah. Well, the government, years ago, I did a report on it, into their budget, they had bank bail-ins. And everybody's, there's a bank bailout, right, where they help the bank. And it's like, no, a bank bail-in. And like you said, it was like what took place. And they come in and they basically take all your assets. And you're lucky to get a portion of that back. And don't think, the banks have insurance. But the insurance pot is limited. It won't cover all of the citizens.
Let's cover that, folks, because I tried to explain this to my mother all the time, because she's got some deposits, and I'm like, Mom, the way this works now is, it used to be the bailout. Okay, so J.P. Morgan, back in like 1912, bailed out U.S. banks, so there wasn't a run on currency and a collapse of even more banks. Then they said, we're going to create the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Canada, so that there's a government institution that does that, and that was called the bailout. Okay. So they would be a lender of last resort, in a sense, in a country to come into a bank that was failing, that was having a run on it. But with a bail-in, it changes that. So it says, no, we're going to take Ma and Pa Kettle's deposits and everything that they've got before we consider doing a government bailout. Okay? So if you've got, I don't care what it is, $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 that you've got sitting as deposits in the bank, you're the first victim, not the government. You're the first victim. And you know how poor Trudeau is with math and balancing budgets and $1 trillion debts, and people who have those deposits in the banks, they're the ones who are going to suffer. So I would articulate that if say, for example, you can get a decent return on investment out of a provincially regulated financial institution, especially ones that honor and value gold and silver, like a Bow Valley Credit Union, like we have here in Alberta, that is a way better situation, because otherwise I think you're courting trouble.
Okay, and what did you say as well when you and I were talking previously about opening a bank account in the United States?
Right. So, for example, they have state-regulated financial institutions, right? And I think they're better than what the federally regulated institutions, because let's face it, Biden and Trudeau are not entirely dissimilar. The United States is examining and looking into the Fed now, and some of this monkey business with their Federal Reserve as well. So I think that a state-regulated bank, now obviously some states are terrible, like California's got massive debt, massive taxation. It's a basket case of the U.S. states. But if you look at other ones, like a Wyoming or an Idaho, that type of thing, Florida, et cetera, they've got more Republican administrations. They're going to be able to have a sounder regulatory framework, just like I'm advocating in Canada, like in the province of Alberta, where I'm telling the province of Alberta, change the provincially regulated financial mantra, if you will, to say that they have to have like 3% in gold or silver or oil or copper, something like that. Could be platinum, whatever. Because that way there's something tangible there, and it'll send a ripple effect in the marketplace where people will say, I'd rather have my money, my accounts, my mortgage, my credit cards, whatever, with those guys. And then even if Trudeau or Biden in the U.S. try to collapse the federal system, there's still something as a bulwark to prevent it. So I applaud the American states that are taking action in that regard, and I'm certainly encouraging that in the Canadian provinces as well.
Okay, so thank you for that. And then for people that are, you mentioned buying Ignit instead of gold or silver, and I'm that's the first time, I've got to be honest, that I've heard the term Ignit. And so either way, okay. Ingot. Oh, in the bar. Oh, ingot. Okay.
Little ingot of gold or ingot of silver. They're little bars as opposed to coins.
Okay.
Like mint.
All right. I'm familiar with the bars. So you have educated me further. All right. Okay. Can you tell me, because I've been curious about that as well. So if everything goes south and the banks are closed and we have now purchased gold or silver, how do you go and buy a loaf of bread? How do you just take off a little piece and go and do that?
Yeah. So in Weimar Republic, Germany in the 1920s, because the currency was just being destroyed, right? They were paying for the reparations for the war, so they just printed money and paid the French and the English and whoever, and so it was terrible, and it wiped out the middle class. But what effectively wound up happening was that people, when they would buy bread or various things, they would take gold or silver chains, and they would literally cut them up into their little individual links and use that. So like let's take, for example, an ounce of silver. And if I got out of your screen, I could go and grab my silver kopeck from 1921 in the Soviet Union. But if you have like an ounce of silver, okay, right now it's trading for just less than $30. Okay, well, that's a reasonable thing to be able to buy gas with, etc. So I would say, like, if you have a massive bar of gold or silver and it's 20 ounces or something like that. Well, how much on a daily basis do you go around and buy with, a $400, banknote or unit that can't be broken down, right? It's pretty tough. So I would say that you're probably better off to do smaller ingots or coins or bars because it makes it easier for smaller transactions.
Right. I've heard about that with the silver and gold necklaces that people are actually collecting them. Don't go and trade it in. Don't go and bring it in and get the cash for it right now. It's more valuable than your cash is. So everybody's going.
That's why they're buying them off you and giving you cash, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They know. Right. They know better. Okay. A couple of more questions here, and then we'll wrap this up. Let me just see. Are local credit unions? Oh, okay. A better place, but you've already mentioned that about investments, loans, and mortgages. They're all governed by the Bank of Canada. And other than having, okay, go ahead.
I want to correct that. So if, for example, in Alberta, okay, we have Alberta Treasury Branch, we have the Christian Credit Union, we have Bow Valley Credit Union, we have Service, we have a bunch of credit unions, banks, if you will, that are regulated by the provincial government. That's a way safer situation than the ones that are regulated by the feds. Way safer situation. And it ultimately comes down to this. Who do I trust more? Justin Trudeau or Danielle Smith, right? I'd far rather trust Danielle Smith with currency and my money and my banking than I would Justin Trudeau. Like, that's a hands down. Now, I feel for people in British Columbia because you got to choose between, Abby and Trudeau. So
it's not good. It's not good.
The way tougher choice.
We're hoping for a better choice in October. So if you don't know, anybody from BC, we do have an election, a provincial election coming up in October, and John Rustad is running a really good slate of people. A lot of individuals from Action for Canada are actually running as candidates. So he's campaigning on a lot of issues that are very, very critical and important to us. So David Eby, watch out. He's the BC Conservatives have actually just moved ahead at 39% ahead of the NDP. So, I mean, it's just bad news here. It has been for a long time, and we're hoping that'll turn around. Okay, I think that I'm just quickly looking at the questions. What will happen to bank mortgages if we no longer have banks? question is are you going to own property? Will you have your house? What do you think? How are they going to transfer? I guess people are asking as well as like, okay, so I have $10,000 cash in the bank. And when they go to CBDCs, will I still have that $10,000 cash in the bank? We're hearing that Trudeau is going to make our cash expire, or I mean, our funds, our digital funds expire.
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you how they do this, because we've watched it in other countries. Like there's a roadmap on how they do this. What they do is they get rid of the large bills first. Okay, so in Canada already, for example, you can't get $1,000 bill. We used to have $1,000 bills. We used to have $10,000 bills. They don't exist anymore. They're gone. Okay, so what they do is they get rid of the large bills. Okay, so they'll first, we still have hundreds and fifties in circulation. They'll take those, and you know what the excuse will be? They'll say, "Oh, those have that dead lady, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, on them. They don't have King Charles. We have to take those all out of circulation so you can have the king, right?" Oh, yeah. So they're going to take all your big bills, okay, and then you're left with the 20s and the 5s and the 10s, okay? And now, try to buy a car in just 20s and 10s, right? It's ridiculous. That's what they're doing in Nigeria. That's what they were doing. That's where they were burning, people in effigy, and they were literally ransacking the banks, okay? It's a terrible scenario. So that's what they do,
But can just while you're talking now about the Nigeria, I read a headline that actually they managed, because they were burning the banks, they got the CBDCs turned around. The government has reversed the decision. So I'm not telling anybody to go and burn banks, but I'm saying there are solutions depending what country you live in as to being able to fight against this. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm sounding the alarm now, because the expiry date on the Bank of Canada, or the Bank Act, excuse me, is June 30th of 2025 next year. So I'm trying to beat the drum on this now so that people say, "Hey, pay attention," because I know that, your average branch manager for a bank is not scouring through, the amendments that were made in an omnibus piece of legislation passed in a sweaty June in Ottawa to the Bank Act. Like, they're not doing that. I get it. They'll be lucky if even their government relations people in Ottawa or Toronto are doing that. But, a guy like me is taking it on, because I'm like, if nobody else is watching this, we're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, no, and that's why I said I was thrilled to have you on today and talk about this issue. And I just want to make somebody put something in the chat. I just want to make sure I said we are not encouraging people to go and burn down banks in Canada. We're just reporting that it happened in Nigeria, and they were successful in turning the CBDCs around because the citizens were very upset about moving towards this digital surveillance, not having control of their money. This is a huge violation to our rights and freedoms. And I always say Canada is founded on Judeo-Christian biblical principles. And even in God's good book, it never says that the government should be controlling our funds. It does say pay to Caesar what is Caesar's, but it never says in there, give everything to Caesar, especially when he's a crook.
I want to share with you an idea. If 10% is good enough for God, it's good enough for government. How do you like that?
There you go. Well, what happens when it surpasses 10%? I think we're far past.
I know, it shouldn't.
Yeah. No, it's so criminal. All right, last question. So somebody asked, what do you think will happen to the Canada pension plan? I've heard it's been sold to China.
Well, sadly, more and more of our money is being invested there. And you can't ask for a worse place in terms of human rights violations. They kill more people on an annual basis than the rest of the world combined, in terms of their Falun Gong oppression and political and religious oppression of Christians, etc. It's just, And the idea that Canada was still sending foreign aid to China, I actually wrote a private member's bill saying that if a country had, religious violations, they shouldn't be receiving a penny of our foreign aid. And China was the largest recipient of our foreign aid. It's just disgusting. We have this debate right now in Alberta about an Alberta provincial pension plan, and I wholeheartedly support it because the CPP has been run like a Ponzi scheme, right? I'm just talking Alberta numbers just for a second. Like, we're overpaying about $3 billion a year in terms of what we pay in versus what we get out. When Paul Martin was looking to raise the contribution rates from 5.5% to 9.9%, I was one of the Reform Party MPs that was going around talking about how all we needed was one more province to opt out of this thing. Ontario was out, Harris didn't like it, Quebec was already out. All we needed was one more, and it would have been dead. Paul Martin wouldn't have raised the contribution rates. But for whatever reason, Ralph Klein wasn't getting along with Preston Manning, didn't see eye to eye on it, and he allowed it to go forward. I remember Bloc Québécois MPs saying to me in the 1990s, if we were even close to your financial situation in Alberta, why do you guys keep on paying this? Like, it's ridiculous. And we have been subsidizing socialism in this country for such a long time. We talked about the wheat board stuff just earlier. We were giving China our wheat at below market prices, thieving it off of Canadian farmers and allowing Paul Martin's Canada Steamship Lines to have a monopoly shipping of that product to China. This is ridiculous, folks. I believe in individualized accounts. With Alberta, even if we ran the same terrible Ponzi scheme that is the CPP, we'd be saving a huge chunk of money. The payouts would be bigger. The contribution rates would be less. But if we had individualized accounts like Chile did, for example, Milton Friedman advised Chile that they should have individualized accounts. So if you went down the street in Santiago, you could knock on a door and they'd be able to tell you how much did they have as a nest egg? What did they put in that year? What was the return on investment? Now, you're all smart people that are paying attention to this, watching this show. If I asked you, how much did you put in your entire lifetime into CPP? What was the return on your investment? What did you put in this year? Most people couldn't answer it because it's a terribly run Ponzi scheme by the government. This is, if you go into central bank digital currency, you're having these same people who ran the CPP in the ground. They doubled the contribution rate from 5.5 to 9.9. You're allowing these same morons to run your currency. Please, people, wake up.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to the beginning. When we started the show, I said you need to care about who you're electing into office. Don't vote for the party, the same old party, one of the big ones, thinking you're going to get a different result if we haven't achieved that in these years past. We know what was it, yesterday or today? The NDP has announced that they're going to support the Liberal budget. That's some sort of news break. We knew it was coming. And I mean... I know. Thinking maybe Jagmeet Singh had something else up his sleeve, maybe he really wanted to get elected again. But forget it. Don't vote NDP or the Liberals. I mean, my goodness, look what they've done to us. They've partnered up. These are traitors to this country. They belong in jail. So, you can't sit back on your sofa and let Action for Canada and all of our hard-working chapter leaders and the few members that we have in each chapter, some hundreds or whatever. But I mean, we need teams of people going door knocking for good candidates. And that's the way it's going to make a difference at all levels of government, because as Rob has said, it doesn't have to be the federal government that has control over our finances. If we have the right provincial government in place, then they can do a lot of work on our behalf, because literally what the federal government is doing is illegal. It's against our Constitution and Charter rights. Literally, these individuals should be in jail because they're committing treason. They're bringing socialism in. It is a coup from the inside of our government. Never mind a coup against our government. All right? They've commenced a war against the Canadian people, and we have the power to put a stop to it. But we need to be educated and we need to know next steps. So, Rob, in closing, is there anything that you would like to encourage people with, or just anything in closing that's on your mind?
Please learn more about this. Pay in cash when you can. Divest yourselves of banks that are in favor of environmental social governance and all that hoo-ha. And learn more about this, educate others, because if we're going to beat this, we need to have more people who pay attention and get it.
Yeah, we need all hands on deck. So this Empower Hour is going to be posted tomorrow. And I've, in my weekly emails, if our viewers have not joined Action for Canada, make sure you go to our website and do so, because every Sunday night I put out a weekly email on our next guest. And when I do that, I am including our previous video, our previous interview from the week before with that guest, because not everybody can come on a Wednesday night. When you see that information, the weekly news update and the Empower Hour, you can help us by sharing it, giving us a thumbs up, and then sharing it with your coworkers, on your social media, with your family. This is really vital information. All right. And that's what they did, wasn't it? I know that I've got a friend who came from Poland. She's one of our chapter leaders, actually. And under tyranny, she was part of the underground system getting the newspaper out. And she was actually imprisoned for doing that because the government does not want the truth getting out into the hands of the people. All right. So while we still can, okay, share this information. So, Mr. Anders, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to having you on the show one day again. So, God bless you for all the work that you're doing.
Bless you. Thank you. It's been a joy.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was amazing. So, all right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is Tanya Gaw with Action for Canada, and this is the weekly news update for May 1st. 2024. Can you believe that? We're already into a new month. Spring is just really pushing its way through. We had a little bit of a chilly time here in British Columbia, sometimes a very hot day. It's that normal April weather that we had. Now we're going to be moving into May, where we're going to do more in the terms of planting gardens, whether it's flowers or vegetables. And we got Dan Vachon that is right there teaching all of us about that. You know, that was a link I should have prepared in the weekly news update, because we got Prepper Dan. And go to our website, look up Prepper Dan. All right, I just kind of got into that off the cuff because I was thinking about all those veggies and everything that are coming, and how many people across Canada are getting into gardening because of the cost of groceries. And so Prepper Dan with Action for Canada is helping a lot of you do that. All right, I'm having a little pop-up problem here. Hang on just a moment. All right, sorry, Trenzio, we'll have to take a little look at that. Something kept popping up on my screen. All right, this is Action for Canada nationwide. We're continuing to grow. I'm really excited because in next week we're going to have, I talked about Prepper Dan. Well, he's also the lead pastor of Action for Canada, Pastor Dan Vachon, and he's going to be coming on next week with a couple of other pastors and talking about our prayer walks for revival, which I'll be talking about in the news update. But that's going on all across Canada right now, from Passover to Pentecost. And I'm super excited about that, because prayer is essential and, to taking down strongholds against our country. And so when you got faithful people praying across the nation, around school boards and around municipalities and around libraries and down pride parades in advance of June, I really believe that God is going to answer huge prayers again this year, as he did last year. And then the week after that, we're going to have the National Chapter Leader Coordinator on, and that is Kim McBride with our team. Maybe next week or the week after that, we're coordinating that. But we want to give you all the exciting news of what our chapter leaders are having success with. I mean, they are actively involved, giving delegations at city halls and meeting with MLAs and MPPs. And I'm telling you, we've had heartwarming, incredible news reports, even visiting MLAs who have been vaccine injured, who really were blind during COVID as to what the greater agenda was. And so our people are going in and having these conversations and actually helping people wake up and become aware and educate them. And they're willing to have a second meeting. They're willing to hear what we have to say. And then they're willing to bring that into the house and have a conversation. So you know what? You have so much power in your hands. If you would join a chapter and help us get the message out and help educate people, we need all hands on deck. We really do need your help. So join us today. I've been asking every week that I've been doing the weekly news update, if you would please join our Rumble page and share our information. We do incredible Empower Hours on topics that are really critical and essential. The one we did last week with with Dr. Mackey's about turbo cancers. I'll be talking a little bit about this and promoting it because we've got a treatment page. And so I'll show you all of that. So I'll just carry along here. I was, an MLA, I don't know how I got on his email list. I think he's an NDPer. And so he had a notice sent out, and I guess he's very proud of the work that they're doing on behalf of BC citizens when they've driven our province, like many other premiers have done, just straight down into tyranny. They trying to strip us of our rights. Well, these individuals, the NDP, David Eby, and the rest of them, they decided that it was going to be a good idea to legalize all drugs in British Columbia and allow these poor drug addicts to go to parks and to do whatever they needed to do to shoot up, because that's their human right. And what it's caused, of course, is opioid crisis. Alberta is complaining about the drugs because, of course, the drug dealers are taking full advantage of this and spreading their goodwill to all of the individuals who struggle with addiction. And addiction is going through the charts, and we're paying a high price for it. So what does the government turn around and do? I'm just going to go back to, let me just get this. Okay, with an election around the corner, BC NDP reverse course on open drug use. So this is Premier David Eby. He didn't really, to me, win an election. John Horgan, for wherever he disappeared and disappeared to, stepped aside. And it's not going to hold him, hopefully, from being criminally liable one day for the crimes against humanity that he committed during COVID. He is a part of Action for Canada's legal action. He is named as a defendant, as is David Eby. And so a year and a half ago, David Eby steps into this role as premier. And he starts approving all of these horrific policies that are putting Canadians at risk. Of course, he's at the head of the helm right now, along with Bonnie Henry, where we've got thousands of nurses who are unvaxxed, very capable of working. We need them back at work. We have a nursing shortage. We have a doctor shortage. And he figures it's a good idea just to refuse to allow them to come back to work because they're not vaccinated. All right. I really hope this individual, get a good look at his face. I really hope this individual is going to be held criminally liable one day for what he's doing. So now it's not very popular having put this policy in place to legalize all drugs. And so now he's backtracking on it because there's an election. But look at this. This is what gets me. BC takes action to hold companies accountable for hurting people. So the Public Health Accountability and Cost Recovery Act will provide the tools necessary for the government to recover costs associated with the promotion, marketing, and distribution of products that are harmful to adults and children. Well, I'm taking a look at this when I'm reading it. My jaw is dropping. I'm like, are they really saying this? I mean, can we use this against them when they put this legislation, this legal action in place? This is so, I don't know, twisted, because we know that throughout British Columbia, Canada, and around the world, people are dying en masse because of the vaccine, so-called vaccine, the mRNA gene therapy. And in British Columbia, Eby and Bonnie Henry are still pushing this. And so here they're saying this new Recovery Act will provide the tools necessary for the government to recover costs associated with the promotion, marketing, and distribution of products that are harmful to adults and children in British Columbia, building on the province's previous legislation to enable litigation against tobacco and opioid manufacturers. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, you are literally the ones that last year legalized all of the hard drugs, which is all part of the Liberal federal government's plan as well. This act further enshrines the robust role of the Attorney General to engage in proactive litigation on behalf of the public. Well, hoorah. What? Our government, are they just forgetting what they do, or they just think that people will forget? Our government previously warned social media giants, tobacco, drug companies, and other big faceless corporations that we would be taking action to hold them accountable for the harm that they are causing to people, including kids. Okay, says Premier David Eby. My message is simple. Here in BC, we expect you to operate in a way that doesn't hurt people, period. Okay, well, Mr. Eby, you're on notice. You are seriously on notice because you've caused grave, desperate, critical harm to BC residents. And we are very aware of what you've done, sir. With this legislation, government will be able to claim public costs such as hospital treatments and doctor appointments, as well as proactive and preventive measures used to address the risk of disease, illness, or injury. Let's think about the injury of the COVID mRNA gene therapy that they have unleashed against the citizens of British Columbia. In addition to companies as a whole, directors, officers of those companies can be held liable. Well, how about the premier of, does he just get a pass? I don't think so, because this is criminal beyond belief, the crimes against humanity that the British Columbia government has initiated against the people of this province. And so bring on this legislation, Mr. Eby. I don't really know if you know what you're doing, but I was shocked to see that they would use this kind of language and not think of the crimes that they've committed. I don't know. Is that too harsh? Let me know in the description. Put it in the chat. I don't think it is. All right, I'm going to get into some resources. I really want to cover the work that Action for Canada is doing. I want to market this to you. And so in return, that you will please support us and invest in the work that Action for Canada is doing nationwide, because I think it's really critical. I think it's important. There's other organizations that are out there that are doing good work. But we are not just reporting on what's going on. We are intricately putting a plan in place across the country by implementing chapters in every single community we possibly can, and then facilitating the citizens within that community on issues that are critical, that are causing you concern, causing you to fear for your family's future, maybe possibly causing you to lose sleep at night. All right? Action for Canada is working so hard on your behalf. And so I'm going to cover in some of those areas and why I am asking you and appealing to you to get involved with local chapters. If there isn't a local chapter, get some people together, start going to your city councils and start getting behind somebody that's going to be a candidate running for office. Go door knocking with them. Do whatever you need to do in your community. We are at war with the federal government, with the provincial government, with some of the municipalities. And I think that if Canadians don't understand how serious this are, we're not going to win this battle. But in everything, there has to be an art of war. You have to have a plan, and Action for Canada has that plan. So, for instance, in business, we have a new business package. I'm just going to scroll down the page. Back in the 1990s, there was a campaign similar to this where en masse individuals helped to educate business owners. And I think that if you look at what we're doing with the SOGI 123 resources, the WinSex Ed resources, where we're going outside of schools and we're literally handing parents an informational flyer that is telling them what's going on in the schools. The majority of parents are thanking us because they had no idea. There's a link on there that comes back to Action for Canada's page so they can learn more. All right, it's not good enough that just the awake people come to Action for Canada's meetings. We have to go and find those who are completely unaware because they're dropping their kids off at school every day, saying, "Have a nice day, honey. Here's your lunch. I'll pick you up in 6 hours." Those parents who are fighting to put food on the table need to know how serious it is of what's going on in the schools. So we're covering that. We're doing the notices of liability. We're knocking it out of the park, and we're having success in pushing it back against the radical LGBTQ agenda. Now, the business campaign, this is huge. During COVID, the government shut down hundreds of thousands of businesses. They did that intentionally because moving towards the 2050 agenda, of course, they want big corporations who will have all the business because then it will be easiest to control the people they're buying and they're spending. Now, they are trying to destroy small businesses with all of the equity, diversity, inclusion, DEI, ESG scores, the Global Compact on Migration, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, etc. So we've created this package, and our chapter leaders are printing them out, and they are going to go door to door to businesses to deliver them. This is something that you could do within your community. So there is a business letter explaining to the business owners and warning them, do not sign up with any of the government initiatives, do not take their funds, and we provide the reasons why, and we provide them a link to our business resource page. Then there's a postcard to give them in a snippet. They're all very business owners, but here, just take a look at this in a bite size, let them consume it, and then hopefully they're going to read the actual letter. We're also asking them to post this poster in the businesses saying, use cash to their customers, not credit, support businesses, not banks. And of course, using cash helps businesses avoid transaction fees and government overreach. And then we go into what is a CBDC. The central bank digital currency is programmed to the individual, which means the bank government will have the ability to totally control your access to your money. And then we go into a list of exactly what that will look like. It will limit where, when, and what you spend your money on, increases risk of identity theft and online hacking, regardless of what the government is promising you. They're lying. It's not possible. It's not true. Monitor and record every single transaction you make. Take fines and taxes automatically from your account, give your money an expiry date, link your wallet to a carbon allowance and social credit score, which will link to your all of your smart technology in your home. So if you're using too much, you've reached your carbon limit within your home on air conditioner or heat, they could shut it off. Anyways, this is an incredible package. It's an incredible campaign, and I'm really hoping you'll be as excited about it as we are. Join a chapter. If there isn't one, get going in your community, print these resources, please, and start talking to business owners. Okay, there was a landmark shift against gender ideology, sex defined as biological sex. I always tell you, I always want to give you good news reports in the weekly news update, and this is phenomenal. I keep saying that this whole radical agenda by the sex activists, under the cover of the LGBTQ, the trans activists, the pedophiles, I call the UN Pedophile Central, all of this is coming undone and common sense is prevailing. The transgender agenda, the belief that men can simply say they are women and they are women, has hit headwinds with a new decision by the National Health Services in the United Kingdom. It explains that the organization that serves the healthcare concerns of millions has proposed a definition change that states sex is a matter of biology. There are men and women. Isn't that what we've been saying the whole time? I just thank the Lord. Again, you know what? This is, I believe, in the power of prayer across Canada. When we did our prayer walk for revival for 7 weeks last year, it was exactly at that time that premiers started passing parent policies. I truly believe in the power of prayer, and I believe that God hears us, but we got to repent for allowing all of this to come into our nation, that we call this a secular nation and not a Christian nation. We have got to get it right in Canada. We got to get right. We got to get back with God. We got to get back to what works as good biblical principles. Okay, here's another one. Tennessee passes bill allowing teachers to be armed at school. Regardless of how you feel about that, Justin Trudeau is trying to disarm legal gun owners to own responsible gun owners, I'm going to add, to not have weapons. And pretty soon, when I'm reporting a little further on in my weekly news update, as I do in every one, we're going to be talking about radical Islam infiltrating Canada and how that threat is escalating. And yet Justin Trudeau wants to take our guns away so that we can't protect ourselves and our families. And there's already so many restrictions on that even if somebody were to come in our home and we did use self-defense, the most Canadians are concerned about would they personally go to jail if the threat is that severe. So there's lots of work to be done in Canada, but I respect the fact that with all the shootings in the schools and so many teachers and children getting shot, that responsible gun owners are going to be able to have their weapon at school. And of course, that people need to go through a psych evaluation. I would never say in the circumstances that somebody who claims to be transgender would be able to carry a weapon, because it is known that the drugs they are on to suppress puberty blockers, etc., is also causing psychological problems. And so I'm glad to see in the report that they say there has to be a psychological assessment. Okay, another big news report. Scotland pauses sex change and puberty blocker drugs for children. I won't go into it. For obvious reasons, it's causing harm. Common sense is prevailing. Tennessee lawmakers, they're just nailing it, just knocking it out of the park in Tennessee. Lawmakers okay bill penalizing adults who help minors receive gender-affirming care. Thank you, God. It still doesn't go quite far enough. I think it's if parents are okay with it, it could happen. But as far as I'm concerned, any parent that wants to put their kid on puberty blocker, I think that they should be charged. And there's other states that are actually doing that, as I've mentioned previously. All right. On the current issues, you can drop down and hit political LGBTQ. In response to what's going on in Canada after just this block of the news report, I just want to encourage you to go down this page and review our information. Go on to the Stop Soji 123 Win Sex Ed. It's called CERB in Manitoba. I think it's called Beyond the Basics in Nova Scotia. It's all comprehensive sexuality education. We've got flyers for you to hand out. Get busy. I just want to show you where it is on the website again under current issues. You'll end up going down to political LGBTQ activism, and that is where you can find our resources. Get out there and start bringing awareness to your local elected officials, to your principals, and start demanding that this information get out of the schools and we start protecting our children en masse together. All right. Just a reminder is that on May 7th next week, our Youth Leadership and Speaker program begins under current issues. If you click on that, you'll see youth programs. Just go down the page a little bit and you will find the information to get to this page so that you can register. I believe it's also on our homepage if you want quick access. All right, what's another thing that we're doing? Well, we're definitely working with the churches and pastors, but we are in the midst of the 7-week prayer walk for revival. If you click on the link, again, this is under resources, go to church resources, brings you to this page, scroll down a little bit, go prayer walk for revival, and that will bring you to this page, and then you can go down just a little ways. You can see all the things that we are praying for as far as the church is concerned, families, and for our governments. And I've had so many reports of chapter leaders who are texting me saying, you know, it was just so amazing. Even though it was pouring rain, 30 of us showed up today and we prayed for our mayor and council. I don't know what these mayors and councils are going to do. I just know that last year, a premier who started passing parent policies, I had an opportunity to meet him a few months ago. And I said, can you tell me about the time that, because he said he had a nudge. He claims to be a Christian and he said he had a nudge. He just had this feeling that he needed to move forward with parent policies. And it was exactly when we started the prayer walk for revival last year. So prayer moves mountains. And I just love it. We love this video compilation that we made from last year. Pastor Dan Vachon put that together. And every time I watch it, it just brings me such joy. I know that God is fully in control and on the move. But for many, many years, we permitted the government to call us a multicultural nation. They called us a secular nation. Then Justin Trudeau said we're a post-national state with no core identity. I mean, it's just complete lies and nonsense. We truly are a Christian nation based on biblical principles that works very well for the Western nations until the communist, socialist, tyrannical individuals stepped into government and tried to move it in another direction. So I mentioned about Pastor Dan Vachon. Pastor Daryl Battle is our new chapter leader in Toronto. And of course, there's Pastor Bruce DeYoung. They're all going to come together next week on the Empower Hour. And we're going to talk about humbly praying for God to heal our land. Big shout out to Hans for his artwork here. I think he does an amazing job at, you know that they say an image is worth 1,000 words. We've got City Hall right here. We have the Public Library. We have Metro Police. I don't know if you saw the Toronto police cars with all of their trans flags and LGBTQ flags, which is the Toronto police showing they're not politically neutral. The LGBTQ movement is definitely political, but it's also supporting and deviants, sexual deviants are behind the trans flag and the LGBTQ flag, as well as pedophiles. So I would highly recommend the Toronto police get the paint out and knock it off, as well as other police who are wearing the trans LGBTQ flag. This is not good. You are not a safe officer for me to approach. You are supposed to be completely neutral. You're supposed to do your job neutral and according to the criminal code and the law. The amendment to the human rights codes does not give you the right to trump my religious rights and my beliefs. So you need to just remove all that propaganda from the system. And anyways, we need to pray for our city halls who are moving towards the 15-minute cities, who are raising flags in support of the LGBTQ and this deviant agenda that's sexualizing our children. And we need to take our towns and cities back. And we can do that together. It's possible. I showed you the good news. That happened because individuals in those countries are lobbying their government for change, for common sense change. And Pastor Dan and the other pastors will also be talking about the journey of Passover to Pentecost. And again, big shout out to Hans. We talk about the Passover of where the Egyptians had these Israelis captive, and God had the Spirit had said to paint blood around the doors. And then when the Holy Spirit and the Spirit came, it would pass by the doors that had the blood, and it was killing all the firstborn in that time because God was very serious. He had brought many plagues against Egypt because they would not let his people go. And so there's other meanings to the term Passover. Pastor Dan's going to talk about that. And then, of course, from Passover to Pentecost, where the Holy Spirit came down and onto 3,000 people who were praising the Lord and filled with the Spirit. But in between that, Jesus Christ came and he died and rose again and is in heaven, sitting next to the right hand of the Father. And that's why I say God is still on the throne. He's perfectly in control of everything that's happening, but he's calling his people back to him. We have to get right with God in this nation. And the attack throughout COVID, the attack in these past years has definitely been a spiritual attack. It's definitely been against Christians and the church, and this is evidence of it. Parksville and Vancouver could face lawsuits if they don't drop prayers. It's like, excuse me? Who is behind this? And so it says the BC Humanist Association is putting Parksville and Vancouver on notice. They will face legal action if they don't agree to ban prayers at their meetings. And so I would ask every single person in this country, and especially if you're in Vancouver or Parksville, there's a few more areas. You know what? Send the mayor and council letters and tell them kudos to you for allowing prayer. And this country, I'm going to keep saying it throughout this news update, is that this country was built on Christian principles. If any prayer is going to take place in the political arena, it is going to be by pastors and Christians. And for a humanist association to come through and think that they can defile our Christian roots, they've got another thing coming. And so the individual behind this is Ian Bushfield. So I looked up this young man, and he has BC Humanist Association, Religion and Public Schools Acts, BCHA set to sue Vancouver over inaugural prayer. Now, the one thing I don't agree here is they had, that little page keeps moving, is that they had Sikhs coming to pray and Buddhists coming to pray and Muslims coming to pray. And we're going to just keep talking about the harms that the multitude of religions that are rising up in Canada are causing. You've got Pakistan, you have India for the Hindus, you have 56 Islamic majority countries. For the Muslims, the Christians need nations. And we have a right and a duty to protect our borders, and that expect that people come to Canada and integrate and support our values. Well, it's fact that our values are based on biblical principles, and I'm going to show you that. I won't bother going into this, but this little guy, if you want to look him up, Ian Bushfield, it's really quite disgusting how he talks and what his agenda is. And if you just go down, he's got putting a cost on religion in Canada. He's a lost soul. You know what? I'm going to ask all our people who pray across Canada to keep Ian Bushfield in mind. This man needs Jesus. I don't know why he's fighting so hard against him. In biblical times, there was a guy named Saul who was actually persecuting Christians and attacking them, murdering them, killing them. And he had a road to Damascus moment, and God got a hold of him, and he became one of the greatest advocates for Christianity, and gave one of the greatest testimonies in biblical times. And so I think that's what we need to do, is we just need to pray for people who are so lost and think that they should be coming out and attacking our Christian roots. And I think that he should also be educated, because in our Constitution Act, the opening line, it says, whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And it's not the supremacy of any God, it is the supremacy of the Christian God. How can I prove that? Well, it's all over our parliament buildings and government buildings, and we've got biblical scriptures that are written all over our buildings. And so, there aren't Islamic statements there. There's not Buddhist statements. There aren't Sikh statements. It's Christian and it's biblical. And so now, if we want to look at the coronation oath that King Charles swore a year ago, it is interesting to see that the King's Orb, there were certain things that were part of the procession, and one of them was what's called the Sovereign's Orb, and it says cross mounted on a globe symbolizing Christian world. And so we're part of the British Commonwealth, and so when the monarchy, Queen Elizabeth had passed and King Charles is now king, and he has to take this oath, and part of the oath, it's all a Christian procession. No matter if they want to say other religions are welcome, well, you can come and view it, but it's a Christian procession. It's a Christian celebration. And it goes on to say, below is full screen, the oath sworn by His Majesty. And I'm just going to scroll down. I just lost my spot a little bit. Sorry, there was supposed to be something highlighted. You can go back on this. Our Majesty, the Church established by law, whose settlement you will swear to maintain, is committed to the true profession of the gospel, and in so doing will seek to foster an environment in which people of all faiths and beliefs may freely live. But may be welcome to partake in the viewing of this, because King Charles was trying to change the oath wherein he would say that the the Commonwealth would include these other faiths or these other religions, and it doesn't. It's according to the true profession of the gospel. And it said, will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain the laws of God? Again, all of this, as I've shown you, all the artifacts, everything that they're using as part of this ceremony has to do with Christianity. So when he was asked, will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel, will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain the United Kingdom's, the Protestant Reformed religion? So this is Christianity. This is proof that Canada is 100% based on Christian principles, biblical principles. It's always been successful in Western nations prior to communists. Remember, Trudeau is not a Christian. He's a communist infiltrator. And so if anybody tries to say, well, look at Canada and the United States, they're supposed to be Christian nations, and look how they're treating their people or going to war with other countries. These are not Christian leaders. Okay, Biden's crazy. He's not a Christian leader, because people didn't care about who they were electing into office, and that the fact, are they Christian? Is the next leader, are you going to put importance on the next leader that you elect into office, the next candidate? Are you going to insist? Are you going to make a commitment to ensure that that person is a Christian, so that they implement Christian principles and we get away from this secularism? Anything that ends in an ism is dangerous to a free society, is a danger to democracy. You've got secularism, you've got communism, you've got socialism. Okay, the list can go on. You got Islamism. It all relates to one thing. Christianity, there isn't Christianityism, all right? It's just Christianity. It is the one true faith following the one true God. Now, when we talk about June coming up, when we talk about right now the Palestinians out on the streets with their Hezbollah flags, their Islamic flags, when you see the Sikhs out on the streets right now with their flags, when you pass the Sikh temple and way up they got these poles with a Sikh flag at the top. All right, this is Canada. And the expectation should be that all public spaces are neutral other than the provincial flag, our federal flag, the Canadian flag, maybe there's a municipal flag or the Christian flag. Those are the only flags that should be flying in Canada. So will you please help us in advance of June, especially with all the radical LGBTQs making their demands, because they go and they appeal to the mayors and city councils and teachers and others by victimizing, by saying they're a poor, victimized minority group. They're not victimized. They are funded heavily from the federal government using our taxpayer dollars. They have superseded any rights that the rest of Canadians has. There is no longer equality in Canada. And we need to understand that this is not a group that's victimized, but they are bullying the rest of the nation, and they are harming our children. So please make sure that you print this letter. It's on the political LGBTQ page. Deliver it to the principal of your school. Say, get all this propaganda out of the school. By law, this school needs to be politically neutral. It is harming people. As well as with your mayor and city calls, many of them last year decided not to fly the flag because of that. Okay, I'm going to shift gears here now. Planning a summer trip to Quebec's Magdalen Islands, you'll have to pay up. And I'm just going to touch briefly on this. You may have heard about it. I have a video here that Viva Fry did. I love Viva Fry. He made it very clear. He interpreted there was a lady that had attended the meeting with the mayor and city council, and she was just a force to be reckoned with. And because she said, because basically what's happening is Quebec, Quebecers have to use a QR code to leave the island they live on. And the government, the municipal government is saying that is because tourism is causing a burden, and so we need to charge. And it's one thing to tax tourism, but quite another thing for citizens to have to show ID to leave one municipality to go to another. I mean, this is the beginning. If we do not push back and take this down, this is the beginning of them implementing the 15-minute cities. All right, so I just wanted to give you an official news report from CBC. Of course, the government, the municipality is stating, well, it's because it's such a burden because of the tourism, and we've got to counter that. And I've got to reiterate, yes, you know what? You may want to charge tourists $30 to go to the island. I don't know how they're going to do that tax-wise, but absolutely no way should a citizen in this country have to show any sort of ID to pass from one municipality into another. That would be like me going into Surrey and then heading to Langley and having to stop at some checkpoint to make sure that I'm a citizen of Surrey. And it's just so diabolical. And so what is this Action for Canada doing? As I mentioned earlier, this weekly news update is all about showing you our resources and how we are effectively working nationwide, going in and doing delegations and going before city councils to say, you need to knock this off. Are you aware back in the 1990s that many cities signed on to these UN policies? And from there on, it's been a downward slide, and it's been very nefarious, very sneaky, very under the radar. But now it is escalating very, very quickly. They're moving this forward, as you can see in Montreal, for them to think that they could implement this. But backlash is absolutely essential. But we also need to be proactive. There are many mayors and city councils who have no idea. They think they're doing good for the environment and watching out for the future for their grandchildren. But I talked to somebody the other day who's closely aligned with a mayor and city council, and he had no idea about the United Nations. None. He didn't know about the World Economic Forum. So we've got our work cut out for us in this nation. So can you understand having these appointments, befriending mayors and city councils, going in and saying, hey, can I sit down and talk to you? Go in and do some research as well first and find out what kind of policies they're already passing at the city level that you may not know about, and then go in and have a conversation and then serve them the 15-minute city notice of liability, because that is letting them know that even what they're doing is actually unlawful. They are putting the interests of an unelected foreign body in place of their constituents, and they were elected to serve the people. All right. Also, we've got climate change page because a lot of this that they're doing at the city level is based on environmental objectives, which are completely unreasonable and unnecessary. So look that up because, like I say, knowledge is power. You got to educate yourself before going in. Just a real quick, this was another very good news report. AstraZeneca admits its COVID shield vaccine may lead to rare side effects. This, I believe, was in court proceedings. And this is very important because this is kind of beginning of the undoing of the end for the pharmaceutical companies and individuals making advancements within the courts that will benefit the rest of us who have legal actions. Now, it's, again, MP Andrew Brigden, I'm afraid COVID vaccine deaths are going to be bigger than the Holocaust, and there's many people that would agree with him. Edmonton police, new vaccination may be harmful, but insisted on it anyways. All right, so there's an admittance there. Legal actions, liability is coming. And then I am just going over to under COVID-19. If you go to treatments, go down to spike protein, because last week we had Dr. Mackey's on. And I've added the video to this page with the information because he covers very important information about ivermectin and other treatment protocols, including fasting and supplements, etc., that can help to reduce either the adverse effects of the mRNA gene therapies, plus to help people who are unvaxxed stay physically strong. So please check out this information. And as this literally could save lives. So please share this information. Moving along, I mentioned that we had Rob Anders on tonight about digital currency. I'm asking you that if you're not receiving our weekly updates, go to our join page, click here, scroll down the page and join to receive our weekly emails so that you can be forewarned about our guests, so that you can register in time, that you can share that information because it's critical to fighting back against the government tyranny. Tonight we talked about the CBDCs. It was an excellent show. So we will have that link in the Empower Hour description once we launch the news update. Okay, carrying on. We're almost finished here. Digital payments fraught with fraud. That's all part of the show. We provide you information on investments. But I just wanted to get the message out right now. The government is marketing digital currency and digital banking, that it will help to protect your finances, but there is no doubt that anything is online is hackable. And this news report that was from this year said digital payments fraught with fraud issues, and that was from the Sweden Central Bank. So this is not a good positive move for Canada. Last week, I had sent out an email, become a PPC candidate, and the only reason I'm bringing this up today is because a few of you had emailed us not understanding. Many people are in panic over the next election. Everybody's got to vote Conservative. Pierre Poilievre is going to win. This was just merely about talking about the populist movement that is really gaining force in Europe and the UK. It's about getting a couple of seats in there. And what's happened by Action for Canada speaking out on all these hard issues for the last 9 years, but as well as Maxime Bernier, the benefit of Maxime Bernier speaking out on what his party has done, it's forced the Conservatives who were refusing, trust me, refusing, no matter how much we lobbied them. They would not talk about gender ideology. They would not talk about the harm to our kids. They would not talk about radical Islam and the threat. In fact, they were having meetings with officials within the Islamic community that were known terrorists. Okay, so we have to have a point where we push the current top, parties. And the only way to do that, as I've always said, is to be the squeaky wheel. So for you, those of you who misunderstand, again, the art of war or aren't familiar with it or are walking in fear, I just want to clarify what Maxime Bernier has done for this country by talking boldly out on these issues. Then others begin to see that they're going to lose votes. At the beginning of this, I told you about David Eby, who has forced the approval of all drugs in British Columbia. We have a massive addiction problem. And now because of pushback, And because there's a new party who's doing the pushback as well, BC Conservatives, now all of a sudden he's changing course. So please understand the value of this in the fight that we're in against the current governments. Okay, and this is what you get. Terenzio I'm just going to play this video right now. This was at an event in Toronto, and it was, again, to appeal to the Khalistani voters. All right, this is not a Sikh nation, but because they don't really have a country of their own, they're seeing it as an easy way to come in and take over Canada. And if you've been to Surrey lately, they just had their the Khalistani Sikh parade, and there was something like 500,000 people, or 500,000 people, I think, showed up. Second largest in the world. Of course, the largest one is, I think it's in, I've got to be careful here, but I thought it was in Pakistan. This is very worrisome. The Sikhs make up 2%. There are 800,000 people, make up 2% of the population. But let's see how our government is pandering to them and why they're doing this. This is what you get if you vote Liberal, Conservative, and NDP. Let's watch this now.
That one of Canada's greatest strengths is its diversity. We are strong not in spite of our differences, but because of our differences.
That's pure
we will
Polyev
rely
right
on
there.
the great Sikh values that Guru Gobind Singh brought forward, values of equality for the common people. We need a direct flight to Amritsar, and we need a national blue seal so that professionals that come here from Punjab or anywhere else can take a test, prove they're qualified, and work as nurses, doctors, and other highly paid professionals. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you.
ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਰੈਕਗਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਇਹ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਉਪਰਾਲਾ ਆ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਤਰੱਕੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ
I can't stand to listen to anything more. The head of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, should be removed from office. And this is why I've been trying to appeal to you. Some have said, oh, Tanya, you're coming against, you think all religions should be shut down in Canada. I think the Khalistani Sikhs should be shut down. I think Jagmeet Singh, who is tied to the Khalistani Sikh, should be removed and arrested. And I think that I'm very disappointed. See Pierre Polyev pandering to the Sikhs for the Sikh vote. And Justin Trudeau, Mr. Dress Up there is a no-brainer. You could hear the Muslims in the background all about Palestine from the river to the sea. They are coming here, all of these different extremist religions, and they're setting up camp, and they are outpopulating Canadians so that they can take over. And there's going to be civil war in the streets. So we're not just having problems with the radical Islamists, with the Muslim population increasing rapidly in Canada, who are now over 5%. But we have the Khalistani Sikhs who are coming here, and instead of integrating and assimilating, nobody speaks English anymore. Canada is now the great Tower of Babel. And I have a problem with that. And I'm appealing to immigrants that if you don't want to have here what you left in Pakistan or India or one of the 56 Islamic majority countries, you need to join me in voting in candidates that believe in our Christian principles, because what drew you here was our freedom and democracy, which was built on biblical principles. I'm going to keep pounding this home because I don't want to live in Pakistan. I'm in Surrey. I can't go anywhere and understand anything that anybody is saying. I have really nice neighbors out back who are Sikh. I can't have a conversation with them because they've never learned the language, and they don't need to. They just go into their clan, they set up their tribe, and as much as they can give me a wave or they grow vegetables and, hand me a cucumber or something, that's the extent of it. And this saddens my heart. I want my Canada back. And it's not racist. It's not about white supremacy or colonialism or any of that, because Christians come in all size and colors. All right. But if you want to be a Khalistani Sikh, go back to Pakistan. We do not want this set up in here. All right. There's nothing but extremism. They were out in our streets protesting with their swords. I showed you those videos a couple of weeks ago in a weekly news update. This is a threat to Canada. This guy is a threat to Canada. And what did he just do? He just sided with the Liberal government with their budget. He has supported Justin Trudeau because Justin Trudeau has a minority government and couldn't do anything without Jagmeet Singh's help. So if you're an immigrant and you hate Justin Trudeau or you like his handouts, understand that he is driving us into a tyrannical nation like what you left. Don't take the handouts and think he's a friend of yours. All right, money buys power, and that's all that they're doing by paying immigrants who are coming into Canada and driving this country into a financial crisis and a housing crisis. Okay, this is also what we're facing on the streets. We're just going to play this video just briefly. This is a woman named Charlotte Cates, who is a radical extremist. She's not a Canadian citizen, and for years, she needs to be deported. She's married to a radical Islamist extremist as well. So just listen to her. This is in Vancouver just recently.
Palestinian resistance and their heroic and brave action on October 7th. And they said, long live October 7th. And we say today, long live October 7th. Long live October 7th. They wanted to make, Justin Trudeau denounced that statement. Pierre Poilievre denounced that statement. Every one of these Canadian politicians who could not find one word to denounce the slaughter of 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza, who could not find one word to denounce the mass graves of Palestinian doctors and patients and mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and beloved ones.
Okay, so now I'm going to give you 5 minutes of reality. We've had Bridget Gabriel on the show before. She was born and raised in Lebanon. She was a Christian. It was a Christian nation. It was thriving. And then the Muslims came in with their swords and absolutely butchered and killed so many people and took the nation over. Bridget is on the front line. She became an American citizen, and she's on the front line warning the West about the Palestinians. So I'll go in a little more detail about who that Charlotte is, but let's just listen to to Bridget Gabriel for a moment, talk about the Palestinians and why they pose a threat to the West, why they are not the victims here.
Well, the polls are in and the Palestinians have spoken. 3 in 4 Palestinians support Hamas's massacre of October 7th. 98% of the respondents said October 7th slaughter made them feel prouder of their identity as Palestinians. Say what? But I thought the majority of Palestinians are peaceful people, you say. It's only those nasty terrorists, Hamas, who are bad. A recent poll done by the Arab World for Research and Development found that 74% supported the Hamas atrocities of October 7th. That's 74% in favor of murdering, raping, kidnapping, mutilating, and burning Jews, and only 12% against. 77.7% want to destroy Israel and replace it with a Palestinian state. Only 17% support the two-state solution. They're not complaining and crying for a ceasefire because they don't want the war, but because they're losing the war. They still want the war. They just want to be winning it. Hamas is more popular in the West Bank, 88% approval rating, than it is in Gaza, 59% approval rating. The Al-Aqsa Brigade, the military part of Hamas, scores big in the West Bank, 86% approval and 69% in Gaza. Those are numbers Biden would kill for. And don't mistake the 9 out of 10 in the West Bank and 7 out of 10 in Gaza as a lack of enthusiasm for Islamic terrorism. Oh no! The Al-Qassam Brigades, the direct terror arm of Hamas, is at 95% approval in the West Bank and 78% in Gaza. Islamic Jihad scores 93% in the West Bank and 72% in Gaza. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade is at 88% in the West Bank and at 70% in Gaza. So now that we know who the Palestinians like, let's see who don't they like. Everyone. 98% of Palestinians in the West Bank hate America, as do 96.8% of those in Gaza. That's still better than the United Kingdom, which is hated by 100% of Palestinians. They actually hate America and the United Kingdom more than Israel, which is only at 97.3%. Ingratitude is one of the consistent Palestinian characteristics. 92% don't like the European Union. 88% don't like the United Nations, and 69% manage to be against the Red Cross. Russia, which continues to back them, gets some of the best numbers. Only 57% don't like Russia. 60% don't like China. Even more ungrateful, 85% don't like Western media, even though they are pretty much the Palestinian propaganda arm. If you give them free food, they will really hate you. If you give them free rockets, they will hate you a little less. The only thing they like is kill people and then kill some more. This isn't a culture or a country. It's a xenophobic death cult that hates the entire world. You don't want them as neighbors or as refugees. Click on the link in this video to sign our campaign to stop any Palestinian refugees from being imported into America. We refuse to come to terms with the fact that some people are bad, no matter what horrors they commit. We're certain that it's only a tiny, itsy-bitsy minority of extremists who have misunderstood Islam and are surely not representative of the vast majority of peace-loving people who want the same thing we want and just haven't been given the opportunity. We don't really believe in evil. Even when we come face to face with it, we make excuses for it. And evil is then able to manipulate us, to play on our sympathies when it has none for us. You see, there is one piece of good news from that poll. 90% of Palestinians would like a ceasefire in the war that 77.7% of them would like to see conclude with the destruction of Israel. How stupid would anyone have to be to give it to them?
All right, so those are some strong words, but this is a lady who has lived and breathed through the destruction of her country. And so the Canada, the mainstream media have really been backing the Palestinians by calling for a ceasefire in the Liberal government. They've called for an arms embargo, and so that Israel wouldn't be able to defend itself. I think it's something like 22 some odd countries, Islamic countries that surround Israel, and they're there to try to defend themselves as Hamas has continually attacked them. If they put their arms down, there was a ceasefire before October 7th. It was Hamas that began that war. It is the Palestinians. I just wanted people to hear. Bridget does her research, and those figures were direct from polls. And people could say, well, of course, the Palestinians hate America because they're attacking against them. Are you kidding? Obama sent them billions of dollars. Biden has sent them money and arms. I mean, the war is so crazy, but why in the world are we permitting them to come and bring their war to our soil? That Jewish people that lived in peace with Canadians are now afraid to go out. Look at the same thing going on in Australia, throughout Europe and the UK. We have to bring a stop to this. And there may be some very nice Palestinian people who are wanting to escape that and they just want to live a normal life. But unfortunately, the Palestinians here in Canada and in the West who are out on the streets by the hundreds and by the thousands are not calling out the Muslims who are killing other Muslims en masse in other Islamic countries. They are just calling out the ones that are attacking Israel because they hate Israel. They hate the Jewish people. And that's a whole kind of wrong. Israel has always been an ally of Canada's. The Bible says that we are to support Israel, and they have our full support here at Action for Canada, especially when we see what the governments are doing in allowing these individuals to come in. So this woman I just showed you, she is actually part of a terrorist watch list. David Eby knows that. But here he goes. He says, BC Premier says Vancouver speech praising Hamas attack was most hateful he can imagine. But what's he doing about it? Did he tell the police, you go pick that woman up and let's deport her? Let's work with the federal government and get her out of Canada? All right, this is Charlotte Cates. And she is the international coordinator for Samadin Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network. So let's just take another look. Here she is. She works at Inclusion BC. Apparently, she states that she's been there for 11 years. This is Inclusion BC, of course, all federally funded, provincially funded with our tax dollars, paying for it. And B'nai B'rith, who is a Jewish organization, huge Jewish organization in Canada, years ago, not just with this individual, this is her husband, and his name is Khalid Berkat. And they're asking for both of them to be deported. But they've reignited this letter to Trudeau. So Trudeau is actually aware that these terrorists, these non-Canadian terrorists from groups that have actually been designated terrorist organizations, are freely walking around our streets and promoting and speaking hate. I thought Trudeau was the big hate speech police. Right? He's going to put anybody that goes against anything that he is in favor of in prison. So, if he's not putting these people in prison, is it because they align with his values? Really deep down inside, is the hate that they're spewing towards Israel in line with Justin Trudeau's values? Why are these people in Canada a second longer? If you go into this report, it gives a really in-depth detail about this individual who is literally a Palestinian terrorist. Okay, he and his wife both. Headlines like Berkat is a senior member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, other known the acronym PFLP, a designated terrorist entity in Canada. And this guy is here in Vancouver, being permitted to live. He has residence here. As the senator noted, because the Senator Leo Housakos, forgive me if I don't say Leo Housakos, if I don't say his name right, has been speaking out and bringing the attention at the Senate level, questioning why this individual is still in the country. Berkat has been allowed to thrive in Canada despite being barred from the United States and Germany. His legal status in Canada remains undisclosed by the government. Down here, the government needs to act immediately, deport Khaled. Samadun also needs to be decertified as a corporation immediately. Remember, I've been talking about how all these Islamic organizations and corporations should be, not only if they're being funded, but decertified as far as having any type of, some of them have status as I'm missing the term of it. Forgive me, I'll think of it just in a moment. But anything that these organizations have been able to set up in Canada need to be shut down, and the head of these need to be deported. We'll just need to go back and edit that, Terenzio. Then another comment, we're glad the Senator Mark Gold acknowledged today that the government is aware of this national security concern, but Canadians are still waiting for a substantive response. Anyways, this goes on. The PFLP carries out assassinations, airplane hijacking, and public massacres in pursuit of its goal of destroying Israel, the soul of the Jewish state. While in Canada, Berkat has published articles in which he calls for acts of international terrorism by the PFLP, targeting Israel and Zionist targets beyond the Middle East. And we've already told you that we know that the Muslims are going for the Jews, but they're coming for us next, and any unbeliever. It's just written in their book. So I encourage you, we're going to put a petition in the description so that you can sign it, the one that B'nai B'rith has promoted here in reaching out to the government. You can see that you just need to add your name and email, and that will be sent to the government to say, deport these people. It's been 2 years, I think back since 2022, that B'nai B'rith has been trying to get them deported. What's the problem? What is the problem in deporting them? A senator follows up on urgent security concerns about terrorist leader in Canada. I just want to show you the headlines in case you want to go in and read them and look up this information. Now, the reason I'm, again, talking about it is because this other news report has just come out saying lack of detention space could force the Canadian Border Staff, the CBSA, to release detainees, internal memo warns. And so if you go into this document, there is not enough room to hold the terrorists that are in Canada or the people that pose a risk to Canadian citizens. Do you think this is by mistake or design? Is Trudeau really that incompetent? I don't think so. Of course, why would he be sending billions of dollars out if we need to secure our borders? He's not incompetent. This is by design, my friends. I've told you previously, arrest warrants issued for 300 foreign criminals deemed a danger to the public, facing deportation. A lot of these individuals are missing in Canada. All right? Incompetent or by design? He wants us to get rid of our guns? Are you kidding? You're a gun owner? Go bury it in the ground, save it, do whatever you need to do, but don't give up your weapons. We're getting to a critical point in Canada, and I'm trying to, wave this red flag. I'm trying to ring the warning bell to let you know this is extremely serious. And when I say that foreigners should not be able to run for office, I mean it. And for the best of intentions for immigrants coming to Canada, if they want the Canada to exist, that they perceive that we are, then we need to get foreigners out of office. They have no business and no right sitting in seats in our cabinets, whether at municipal level, provincial level, or the federal level. And we need to shut down all manifestations of Islam in Canada. That means their Islamic centers, the Islamic schools. We've shown you what's going on in the Islamic schools where they show beheadings. They teach hate in those schools. Within the Islamic centers, we have so many imams that have been invited in out of Canada to their mosque that preach hate. And yet the Canadian government, for years and years and years, as we've appealed to them, have allowed this problem to continue. All right? We have a right and a duty to protect our country for the future of our kids. If Muslims want to come into Canada, you're welcome, but you need to integrate and assimilate. And you need to, put your past behind you. We can't even say this is a multicultural nation anymore because multiculturalism worldwide is a failure if the host country's values are not embraced. And the Netherlands' experiences, London, Europe, Australia, we're all experiencing the same thing. So you tell me why the UN is chastising the West and they have nothing to say to the radical Islamic nations, all 56 of them, who are persecuting and murdering Christians and non-Muslims, where Christians can't set up churches. You don't see the Sikhs with temples there. And yet we're supposed to bow down and give over all our ground to these infiltrators who are proving to cause destruction to Canada and who are proving to be a threat as the population grows. When they were 1% and 2%, they stay silent. They are now at 5%. Look what's going on in our streets. And take a look at 10% at what is going on in Europe and the UK. My friends, this is a warning to the nation. We need to take this seriously. We need to care very much about who we're electing in the next elections. And I say that to my friends who are immigrants, and I say that to my friends who are Canadians who are born and raised here. We need to work together to undo this government. If you want more information on the political radical Islam under current issues, you'll see this title. Just click on it. Take a look at this report. Take a look at other information. You'll find the Stop Mass Immigration. We're trying to put a moratorium on immigration until we can sort this mess out and get it under control. So please sign the petition and share it. Then one of the major concerns that they've just reported, the lowest birth rates, highest immigration, define Trudeau's disastrous legacy. Meanwhile, in France, and I would consider that Emmanuel Macron is not a friend of the people, but he is demanding now more babies are vital to maintain France's national vigor. Italy's Giorgia Meloni has made encouraging more Italian women to give birth. Hungary has done the best job of ever because they did not allow the immigrants into their country, and they give financial incentives for families to have more children. And I believe Poland is following suit. They are very patriotic to their own nation. They have a right to. This is not about the color of anybody's skin. It's about the condition of the heart. So we need more babies in Canada. We need to cut immigration. We need to deport a whole lot of people who mean us harm. And we need to take this very seriously. And we need to be able to speak about this out loud. And so we're paving the way for you. Please join me on my Twitter, Tanya Gaw, or at Gaw Tanya. I don't know. Many times I've said every week I'm saying I don't know if Twitter before they had banned me. I don't seem to be able to get those numbers up again, which I find very suspicious. But I'm reporting on all of these issues so that if you need evidence and proof, if you need actions that we're running on, whether it's 15-minute cities, if we're responding something to or reacting, I always provide you resources and material from our website because we are an action-oriented organization that are pressing in against the government, and we are having a huge impact, and we need all hands on deck. All right, please, if you believe in what we're doing, we need your help. Please become a monthly donor, $10 a month from all of our members. It's amazing what we can do together. And if you just spread the love, if there's somebody else from another organization that you want to give $10 to as well, it's a minimal amount of money, but the impact when we do this together is immense. And so we thank you to everybody who is a monthly donor and who is supporting Action for Canada on a monthly basis. All right, so next week, Pastor Dan Vachon will be on with Pastor Daryl Battle and Pastor Bruce DeYoung. These are amazing men. I'm just so honored to know them. They're going to be talking about the pastors and how they're working together with Action for Canada to make a difference within their own communities. We're going to be talking about the power of prayer, and we're going to talk about the significance of Passover to Pentecost and how that all works together into the 7-week Walk for Revival from Passover to Pentecost. So please join us next week. Mark it on your calendar. Invite others. All right. So the verse for today is from Romans 12:19. And, after we feel all this toxic information from the weekly news updates, even though there's good news reports, remember that because the public aren't sitting home and feeling defeated, they're out there on the front line with us. They're making the phone calls. They're signing the petitions. They're writing the letters. They're going in and having appointments and talking to their elected officials. We are making a difference, and we're not to fret, and we're not to feel it's within our power to take revenge, because in Romans 12:19, it says, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord." All right. So I take great comfort in that. But God as well doesn't tell us as Christians to sit back and do nothing and take our hands off. All right. It says that we are to be there for the widow and the orphan, that we're to expose evil. All right. We got to be proactive in doing that. And that's what Action for Canada is doing along with your help. So thank you for joining us. God bless you, and God bless Canada.
Today's episode was sponsored by Galatians 5:1 Freedom Coffee. Galatians 5:1 is the first freedom-fighting coffee company focused on bringing unity back into community by bridging the divide with gourmet coffee. It goes beyond fueling the fight for freedom. Action for Canada receives 10% of all coffee sales made. Galatians 5:1 offer a wide selection of coffee products. Go to Galatians51freedom.coffee to choose your own personal coffee experience made just for you.
care for one another again and love on each other and give each other the help when they're down. We are going to use the teams and the people that build within chapters to support our businesses. The government's actions are completely 100% unlawful. Judgment will again be found on justice, and those with virtuous hearts will pursue it. You have a virtuous heart if you are here today pursuing freedom and righteousness. And then verse 23 comes along with a promise. God says he will turn the sins of evil people back on them. He will destroy them for their sins. I take great comfort in that because I serve a mighty living God who has allowed us to go through this season of discomfort because we as a nation had turned our backs on him and we need to get right. So I am just going to thank you so much. I'm going to say God bless you